I'm Susan Gore. I started this outfit, and I was lucky enough to find a bunch of very capable people to work with. I'm going to introduce them very quickly to you. This is Chad Evans, Mandy Lutke, Amy Edmonds. Ben Barrs joined us from Maryland, Washington, D.C. area, where he networks very effectively. And Charles Curley is here, and also a member of the legislature who's been, we really approve of your voting record, Marty Halverson. Thank you very much. Did I miss somebody? Anyway, we'll have, Sven Larson is furiously working in his office, but he will join us later. And Steve Klein is also coming in a little bit later. And Steve is our other constitutional attorney besides Ben, and Sven is our macroeconomist. And Amy is our appropriations detective. But the main show tonight is going to be Maureen. Step out, Maureen. Maureen and I were trying to do a radio ad, and we wanted to do something with a cowboy code. And Maureen said, well, let's put it into a rhyme. So this is our theme. Live each day with courage, do what must be done. Help cut government spending, there's a battle to be won. So, I hope you won't be able to forget it because it's in rhyme. And Maureen is just, has a tally of awards that we just received from the Press Association. And she's going to tell you about them before she tells you more about the budget cut charade.
Great.
Calvin Klein, I forgot to mention him. He's our intern.
Calvin Thompson.
What does he wear?
Yeah.
You don't want to know.
Yeah, so we were really fortunate to be recognized by the Wyoming Press Association. We actually got first prize for 3 press releases on the same topic. And that was actually our free speech versus the FEC campaign that is being run by Ben Barr and Steve Klein, who are there. Thank you very much. These guys are just absolutely machines when it comes to this sort of thing. We also got second prize in op-ed writing for my article, Budget Cut Confusion Camouflages a Charade. That's why I don't do rhymes. So that was really great. And we also got honorable mention for 1 press release on a single topic on why Liberty joins the effort to stop forced health insurance purchase, which again was our legal team, and we should thank them again for that, because these guys are on fire. They've done a ton of really great work. If you get a chance to go to the legal center, you can see all about the free speech versus the FEC campaign that we've got going, and that's something that's going to be going on for a little while, so that's really great to have these guys working with us. And I really think one of the things we need to do is thank Susan Gore, because quite frankly, I don't think we thank her enough. This place wouldn't be here, we wouldn't be here without her, so let's give a round of applause to Susan. So before 2008, we were living in pretty darn good economic times. You might have yourself gone out, bought a new car, bought a new boat, your spending, income was going up, and so probably was your spending. Then the party ended. What did most families do? Well, maybe their income has gone down, maybe a spouse has lost their job, they might have to sell that extra boat, they're probably cutting back on their spending. Now, surely, what is prudence for a family could hardly be folly for government. So what did the governor do? He said, well, spending has doubled over the last 10 years, and this is unsustainable. So back in 2011, he called on most state agencies to cut their budgets by between 5 and 8%. And the reason he caught this sort of sudden flurry of fiscal restraint was because severance tax revenue was on the wane. So you can see since the late 1980s, we have severance tax revenues kind of going like this, and government spending was kind of going like this as well. Then suddenly in about 2000, severance tax revenue started to shoot up, and spending was right close behind. So just so we're all on the same page, and you know what a severance tax is, a severance tax is essentially a tax on the value of mineral extraction here in Wyoming. And when the governor started talking about these budget cuts, I thought, oh yeah, that's really great, you know. But what I really couldn't understand was where these numbers were coming from. And so what that did was motivate me to write a series of articles. As I mentioned, one of them got the award. If you look in the back, there's a Liberty brief. We put them all together in a Liberty brief. And essentially what I've done is gone through how I went and figured out what it was the government was talking about when they were talking about this budget cut, which for some people was absolutely draconian. But in my case, I was just kind of left scratching my head. You know, it really kind of felt a little bit like I'd fallen down the rabbit hole. Because, you know, you look at government spending and well, firstly, Wyoming budgets on a biennial basis. That means, supposedly, every 2 years the government does a budget. The 2013-2014 biennium budget was about $8.1 billion. This budget cut is 8%. The total cut was $75 million. And I kind of scratched my head then too, and I thought, well, that's kind of strange because 8% of 8.1 billion is $648 million. Where did this $75 million come from? And I thought, well, you know, let's do a little bit more investigation. So I started asking around, and somebody told me, oh yeah, you know, actually this cut comes from the general fund. Oh. Well, I guess that's something to know. You know, the government, when we're talking about budgets, it's really important to understand just what exactly it is we're talking about. Because this particular budget, the $8.1 billion or so budget, that revenue comes from three sources. One is this general fund that I'm going to go into in detail in a bit. One is federal funds, obviously money that comes from the federal government. And the other is called, in fact, other funds. And that comes from every single other way that the government has figured out how to pick your pocket. So where does this general fund money come from? And there's actually a really interesting document that the Legislative Service Office puts out. And if you're interested in more information, I would really encourage you to pick this up. They've got the 2013 Budget and Fiscal Data Book, which looks really, really intimidating. But it is loaded with a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about, plus all the details. And they've got all these charts that show you where all the money comes from and where it all goes. It's really confusing. But basically, the general fund, which is the main state government spending fund, has three major sources. One is the severance tax, as I mentioned. The other is state investment income. And the other one is the sales and use tax. And then, as I mentioned, state government spending, or the general fund appropriation, sort of hovered around 1.6, I have my millions and billions mixed up here, 1.6 billion for quite a few years. And then suddenly, poof, severance tax revenue starts to go up. Poof, general fund appropriations start to go up as well. And they actually topped out at about $2 billion in the 2007-2008 biennium. Oh, okay, well, listen, I'm thinking, okay, now I figured out where this $75 million was coming from. But in 2013-2014, the general fund appropriation was then $3.2 billion, which is roughly twice as much as $1.46 billion. But 8% of $3.2 billion, that's not $75 million. That's $256 million. Well, you know, I'm just thinking, okay, maybe it's my calculator that's not working properly. But no, my calculator was working fine. So I'm thinking, okay, there's obviously something else that's going on here. Finally, I figured it out. It's not that each agency is going to cut 8% from its budget. It's not even that it's going to cut 8% from its biennium general fund appropriation. It's going to cut 8% from its 2014 standard budget, of course, excluding one-time funding. Now, this whole budget exercise is a bit of a moving target, because although the governor talked about 8% budget cuts, when he presented his budget at the end of last November, that 8% budget cut actually shrunk down to 6.5%, we shrunk from 75 million to 60.5 million. So if you thought that this government had a sudden attack of fiscal responsibility, yeah, you're wrong. So all of this is kind of abstract. So what I decided to do to help make it a bit clearer, especially for myself, was to work through a couple of different agencies just to see how this actually worked. The first agency I picked, just because I happen to do a lot of work on the retirement system, was in fact the retirement system. And it's a kind of a complicated agency to understand, but their budgeting is relatively straightforward. So the retirement system is the government agency that takes care of the state employee pension plan, basically. It's their main job. They have a 2013-2014 biennium budget of 13.8 million, so almost 14 million. Their general fund amount is $3,200,775. What is their 8% budget cut? Agency with a $14 million budget, their 8% budget cut is $1,310. Did you?
What is that 14 million cover? That doesn't cover funding the pensions, does it? Is that just
Yeah.
administration?
Okay. No. Most of that money, actually, almost all of the retirement system's budget comes from contributions by taxpayers, contributions by employees, and their investment income. That's where most of their money comes from.
What do we put into that fund as taxpayers?
You mean I'd have to check, and I have a feeling it's going to go up. I've been keeping an eye on these guys because. Yeah. Well, that's actually a whole other topic, but because people know that these pension plans, especially the defined benefit pension plans, all around the world, but here in the U.S. also, are in crisis, and so there are some things going on with these. But I have a feeling it's going to end up costing you a lot more at the end of the day.
So would it be safe to say that the 8% budget cut of $1,310 is just a figure plucked out of the air that doesn't have any real foundation coming from anywhere?
Yeah, it does. Although I know it sounds like that. So the retirement system gets its money from, as I said, mostly from what we call other funds. The 8% budget cut only comes from a cut out of this general fund appropriation. The only money that the retirement system gets from the general fund is $32,775 for 2 years. That's money that goes to fund the EMT's, Emergency Medical Technician Pension Plan. That's how that works. Yeah, I know it's really confusing. I was getting headaches thinking about this stuff. So I did a whole bunch of other agencies as well, and in the Liberty Brief that you can pick up, you can read through if you really, really want to get totally outraged. But just another sort of simple budget that I looked at was the Fire Prevention and Electrical Safety Department. Their 2013-2014 biennium budget is $7.6 million. Now, 8% of $7.6 million is $600,000. But in fact, you can see the little weeny thing down at the bottom. Their budget cut is actually only about $290,000 roughly. Well, why is that? It's because only $6.8 million comes from the general fund, and that's their biennium budget, so that's their 2-year budget. Their 2014 general fund appropriation is $3.3 million. Do the math. Voila. $290,000 in cuts. Now, the reason I brought this particular agency up for this group in this example is because of where those cuts are coming from. It's cutting almost $300,000 by eliminating 2 vacant positions. So let's think about what that means. That means that we've got one position that pays $77,000 roughly, another position that pays about $105,000, and we get, so we've got one position that pays $77,000, another position that pays about $109,000. That adds up to about $186,000. Well, what happened to the other $105,000? It goes to their benefits. One position had benefits of about $53,000. Another position had benefits of about $52,500. This is in a state where the median income, so what median means is if you line up all the salaries that everybody makes, you pick the exact middle one, the median income is about $53,000. So here we have people earning right around what these guys are making in benefits, being forced to fund these benefits. So hopefully you're outraged about that.
Does that 53,000 include them?
It would include them too, because it's just lining up everybody.
The real people.
That you'd have to do another calculation, but yeah, salaries. I think Sven Larson has also done something on state salaries and local government salaries. And what we have been finding, and in fact, I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. What we have been finding is big increases in. And actually, there's a funny story about that. I'll tell you later when I get to that particular department. But big increases for sure in the salaries paid to government employees. So now I'm thinking, okay, I've got this figured out. I can do the math. I've got a little formula, a little template. This is easy now. Just look at this, do this, do this, do this, bingo. Then I got a call from a legislator, and he said, you know, can you take a look at the game and fish department? Because, you know, I'm having a lot of trouble figuring this out. I'm thinking, no problem. I've got this totally under control. I'll look at it. And so I start looking at it, and I start thinking, okay, this budget is not like the other budgets. The game and you know, if you just look at what the Game and Fish Department is talking about now when they're talking about their budget cuts, and you go to their meetings and you listen to them talk about how, oh my God, they're going to cut our budget. We're going to have to fire people. This is going to be absolutely terrible. So you look at their budget documentation, and they'll say that for 2013-2014, their biennium budget is about $9.8 million. Their general fund appropriation is about $4.4 million. So they're going to have a budget cut of about $350,000. But they've left out their hidden budget. Because they've got this other thing called a commission budget. Now, there are only a couple of groups in the state that have got this secret budget, I call it, or hidden budget. That's the Game and Fish Department, the Wyoming Department of Transportation, the University of Wyoming, and the community colleges. They've got the budget that's under the scope of the people we elect to take care of our money, and then they've got the other budget. So if we just look at 2012 as an example, the commission budget for the Game and Fish Department was $72 million. If we add their 2012 general fund appropriation, we get a total budget for 2012 of $77 million. 8% of $77 million is $6.2 million. So the $350,000 is about 1% of their 2012 budget. And these guys, luckily we've got Calvin here working as an intern, because I've sicked him on the hidden budget for the Game and Fish Department, and he's done some excellent work. I really encourage you to go to our website, because, you know, one of the things that he found that we talked a little bit about before is that, okay, so the Game and Fish Department is going to the legislature, and these guys are a tenacious bunch. They're going to the legislature and they're saying, you know, we need about $10 million, otherwise we're just not going to be able to do our jobs. Well, Calvin did a little bit of research, and he found that between 2007 and 2011, salaries for permanent employees went up by about 35%. Salaries for regular people went up by about 11%. And what was really interesting is that the cost of this increase was about 10 million. You guys are just too smart. I can't believe it. Yes, it was $10 million. I just was shaking my head. And in fact, you know, and they have been, I mean, really tenacious. They've gone.
Never call them stupid again.
No.
They're not stupid.
No. They've tried 4 times to get a license fee increase. They started with Senate File 32, which I don't know what happened to. It just kind of went away. Morphed into House Bill 136, which got shut down in the Travel Committee. That changed to 236, which also got shut down in the Travel Committee. But to be on the safe side, they set up another bill, 260, that they said, look, we can't deal with this Travel Committee anymore. Let's take it to a different committee. Which committee do you think they went to? Oh, the Revenue Committee. You know what the Revenue Committee did? Passed the gas tax. So this is the, if you're not having any luck with this committee that doesn't like tax hikes, let's go to the committee that does like tax hikes. What do you know? Pass through. Now, I'm very happy to say that the House shot down that bill, 52-8. Yay! A couple of days ago, we were really, really pleased about that. So, and it was kind of funny because in the committee meeting for 236, I was there, and one of the representatives who's on the committee, Alan Yagi, said, well, to the Emmerich, I think is the name of the director of the Game and Fish Department, he said, well, you know, I asked you for a document that you would give me where you would sort of prioritize your spending. Because, of course, once they prioritize your spending, you can see what you can get rid of. You know? And they kind of went back and forth a bit, but he didn't get an answer, unfortunately. And so when I stood up, I said, well, I can tell you where their priorities are. Look at these pay hikes. And then we passed that little article that Calvin had done around, and they managed to kill that bill, and we were very happy to see that. So you might wonder, how does this happen? How is it that every single biennium, and not to mention every single in-between year as well, does this budget tend to go up? Well, that's because that's how the system works. It's set up to do that. There's a department in the government called Administration and Information. They create this infamous standard budget that I mentioned a little bit earlier for all the agencies except the Game and Fish, YDOT, and then also the University of Wyoming and the community colleges. I just haven't done any work with those two other departments, so I only really know a little bit about the Game and Fish and YDOT. What is that? Well, it's last year's budget plus an adjustment for cost increases. The agency, so Game and Fish, for instance, or the Retirement Department, would take a look at the budget that the Budget Department made up, and then they would make an exception budget. Oh, you know, this isn't enough. Our costs have gone up way more. You know, we need more. And then A&I puts all these budgets together and gives them in a package to the governor. Meanwhile, there's a group called the Consensus Revenue Estimating Group. And this is a group of people from both the executive and the legislative branches in a universe. People essentially somehow or another connected to government. They create a revenue forecast. The governor compares those two things. So how much do these agencies want to spend? How much money are we going to have coming in? And then he prepares his budget that he gives to the legislature. And then so what's going on right now is the legislature is modifying and eventually will be approving the budget. And as I mentioned, the budget year was last year. This year we're getting a supplemental budget, so it's needless to say. You think, oh, well, it would be down $75 million, but no, it's actually going to be up. The general fund alone is going to be up, not down. It's going to be up about $131 million, not down by 75 or even 60.5 million. So I would really encourage you to pick up a Liberty Brief if you want to read more, because I've done quite a few of these agencies. And you can go also and check out Calvin's articles, because he also has written about a number of areas where we could definitely see cuts to the Game and Fish Department. They spend twice as much to raise pheasants as a equivalent private sector organization. Cost them twice as much to farm fish as an equivalent private sector organization. And we've been actually very lucky to have Calvin here to do all this extra work, because I managed to get the budget book. He's managed to have the time to go through, because it takes a lot of effort to sort of start thinking about, okay, where is the waste? What can we find? Go through these budgets and find these stories. And they make really great stories. So if you have any questions, I'd certainly be happy to answer them. You can wait for that.
It sounds like these exception budgets that the agencies create can go up, but they never go down. We need some ombudsman agency or something that looks for areas where maybe they spent less than inflation and also submits that information. It seems like there's something missing there.
Yeah, one of the things that we've been talking about here and Sven Larsen is working on is something called zero-based budgeting. So what we need to do is get away from this idea that that we just start with this baseline and they go up. I mean, it's not just Wyoming that does this. Every single state government does it, and the federal government does it as well. It's just what they do. And what we are saying is that what we need to do is zero out the entire account every single year. A lot of times you hear these bureaucrats saying, well, we do zero-based budgeting. We zero out. In other words, we have no money left in this fund at the end of the year. No. What I'm saying is that You take your cost for whatever it is, you start right at the very beginning, and you justify every single penny that you spend. That's zero-based budgeting. So that's what one of the things we're calling for.
There was a bill, I don't remember the number, from Sue Wallace and Phil Nicholas to bring game and fish and WyoDOT under the legislative budget process. What's the status of that one?
That one, okay, so one of the things we were really pleased to see is Sue Wallace bring forward a bill, HB 78, that will bring both WYDOT and Game and Fish, bring all of their budget under the scope of the legislature. I think that's passed out of the House now, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
It should be up with the Senate this evening sometime.
Right. Oh, that's right. Calvin just published an article, in fact, on that. He's right on top of this. So thanks, Calvin. That's right. And there was another bill actually I was going to mention too. And the other bill that I should probably mention as well, but I'm not sure what's happened with this one. Again, Alan Yagi was saying, you know, this business about having, we budget on a biennial basis. But so now we've started to budget every single year. You know, this has really got to stop. And so Amy Evans said, well, bring a bill forward. And he did, HB 180. So I don't know what's happened with that, but essentially what it would do is limit supplemental budget requests to only emergencies. So no more of this, well, you know, we really just need to have more money, da-da-da-da-da, because our costs have gone up. No. You know, you've got, I mean, think about it. If you've got your own, you're a family, you've got your own budget, and suddenly, you know, somebody's lost their job, you've got less money. Can you go to your neighbor and say, hey, I've got all these expenses. Give me money. No. Well, government shouldn't be able to do that either. They've got to start living within their means.
Does that bill define what constitutes an emergency? What happens is governors, for example, will declare an emergency if they get a little less rainfall than normal or a little more than normal, so they can get free money.
Yeah, it does define, if I recall correctly, something that it has to be. The governor has to call it an emergency. But I think he from what I've heard, is not really very happy about this bill. A lot of people are not really very happy about this bill, and I think what that might do, should it pass, is really bring a lot of attention to him and the decisions that he's making. So I'm imagining that's probably why he doesn't really like that bill that much.
Well, forcing the governor to request more money isn't really setting the bar very high.
Yeah.
I've talked to Amy and Sven on KGAB a couple of times.
Mm-hmm.
I firmly believe that we will go no place with decreasing the budgets until we decrease the amount of employees that we have.
Mm-hmm.
As a small business guy, that's about the only place that I can save money is by having fewer employees, because my overhead's going to stay the same. My electric bill, all those things stay the same. And it's the employees that are killing us, because you said that their salary and their benefits continue to go up
Mm-hmm.
at a pace that we cannot. And the governor didn't put a freeze on hiring. I know 3 people in the last 6 months that have quit jobs with the private sector and now are employed by the state, or they were in the public sector. Now they're employed by the
Mm-hmm.
state. So until somebody decides we have too many employees, which we have more employees in the state of Wyoming per 1,000 people than
That's right.
any state in the union. It's
Mm-hmm.
over 300. We have 300 people looking out for 1,000 of us. That's ridiculous.
But that 1,000 is paying the salaries and benefits for the 300.
So we
I
can't
mean,
beat this deal till somebody decides we have too many employees. We just
Yeah.
cannot beat it.
No, you're right. I mean, when anywhere in the private sector, when it's time to start, you know, when the economy is on a downturn, what's the first thing that you see going? Well, so-and-so has cut this many jobs, so-and-so has cut that many jobs. But it's very difficult for politicians to do that. After all, they need to get voted in next time, right?
That's right.
So
what'll take care of this is the fact that Wyoming won't have any money one of these days, and then things will happen.
crisis budgeting, yeah.
And I'm waiting for that day. I might be the only one in the state that's waiting for that day, but truly I am waiting for that day.
You'll be paying all their salaries because the rest of us will have left.
Yeah. Excuse me. I couldn't see room for cuts right now just off what you presented as far as the $100,000 salaries and so on. I know government seems to be the only outfit that pays these top wages, and I am just down here on the bottom feeding, but I don't know that many people in the private sector that make over 70, maybe 80 grand if they're lucky with benefits. And I don't know how to suggest that we start cutting wages for these so-called directors and so on, and what justifies their $100,000 salaries.
Well,
And
it's
we,
not
the people of Wyoming, are ignorant of this fact, and we just sit back and let the legislators pass these salaries through on the budgets. So I'd like to see a bill presented or something to cut the wages. So that's just my rant.
Yeah, it was not unheard of for governments to do that. That certainly has happened in other places. There's no reason why it couldn't happen here. There has been a bit of a salary freeze in the government, though, so things haven't been going up quite as badly as before. And there has been a bit of a hiring freeze, but again, it's a bit of a tricky hiring freeze. So yeah, what we do really need to see is some serious cutbacks.
We would like your best thinking on this. I call cutting back budget something like government spending, something like getting an elephant to turn a cartwheel. It's a really tough challenge. One of the things that Sven is suggesting is parity. For instance, a school, it was St. Mary's School here, has 7 non-teaching staff and 20 teaching staff. And the public school system here has, I can't give you the numbers, but it's 3 times as much. The ratio is 3 times as much. So you have more people supervising the teachers than you have teachers.
It's classic.
And there are a lot of examples like that. In the local communities, for instance, in the last 4 years, the hiring rate for government workers has grown 23%, while in the hard times it grew 1% in the private sector. And in terms of what this gentleman said, what everybody complains about, that we don't have a good diversified economy. But what's happening is all the talent is being hired off by the government. And so my theory is if we could cut back, we could grow our economy. So we're interested in setting these parity rules. If parity means your compensation doesn't grow faster than the private sector. It means you don't hire more people. Labor force in government doesn't grow faster, and things like that. So at least for transparency's sake, when we do the analysis, we can make that comparison and scream about it, and maybe we'll get some legislation and some results.
You know, one of the things that I think we fail to do as citizens is demand to find out and know what the benefit package is for government employees. So much of the time they get a salary plus benefits, and so all we hear about is their salary. We don't hear about the benefits. I wonder even how many of the state employees or even the local county government employees understand how much they get in benefits in addition to their salary. And I think once that would be exposed, I think you would probably find that there might be some more willingness perhaps to cut some of the salaries and to bring them more into line. It's just something that, you know, shedding the light in the darkness type thing.
You're absolutely right.
To follow up on that, there's a couple things. First off, education would be great, but I would say don't put it in terms of dollars, you put it in terms of percentages, because as a former government employee, I'm an engineer by training, I've been responsible for budgeting, and I will tell you that the typical percentage that I paid, and this was in another state for a federal agency, was about twice the going percentage of what the private sector was. So dollar for dollar, even if the salaries were roughly the same or roughly a little bit higher, it was an exponential increase or a geometric increase because the percentages were twice as much. As a businessman, I'm a firm believer in the free market, and I think there's a very simple solution here. I don't know that you would ever get it through the state legislature, but it'd be worth a shot. To cap the entire compensation package, salary and benefits, at something around the neighborhood of a 90% or something like that, because as we know, it's very difficult for a government agency to fire people or to reduce. There are laws they have to go through, and it's set up that way so that you don't get into some political, you know, tit for tat stuff. So because they don't have the risk of losing their job the same way an employee from my company would, we have no contracts, we cut salaries. It's the first thing we do. There's a risk to that, so I've got to reward the people that work for me with a higher salary or a higher pay to compensate for the fact that they may be out of a job in 2 weeks. State employees or government employees in general don't have that risk, so to compensate for that risk, drive their salary down to a percentage below a 1.0 factor, and then the funny thing will happen. If they're a very good employee, as Susan mentioned, and the talent is there, there'll be a job offer outside, and that job offer will be a salary increase for them, and they'll be able to look and say, huh, am I worth that much? Is it worth the risk? And they'll make that decision. It'll self-regulate over time.
Yeah, very good point. Thanks, Keith.
Maureen, thanks for your work. I think it's fascinating. I'm kind of a simple mind, so help me understand. There's $8 billion budget, and so the public's expecting a $640 million cut.
No, I think the public is expecting a $75 million cut. They just don't realize that the budget is absolutely massive, and the $75 million is actually not a cut to the budget. You know, I think it was Karl Marx who said one of the best ways to sort of undermine a society is to undermine language. And so what we have is sort of a perversion of language here. And so what people are not understanding, or what people are assuming, is that when the government says budget, that they mean the same thing that what people are thinking is the budget. But what people need to understand is that when a government or a politician says something, they need to really make sure that they know what it is they're talking about, because they're not talking about the budget. They're talking about a very small part of 1 year of one part of the budget. So, you know, when these budget cuts were first announced, and this is part of the reason why I started looking into this, you had all the lefty groups going, "Oh my God, these are draconian." And I looked at that and I thought, well, it's $75 million. You know, well, what is the budget? Well, this government is spending $8 billion. How could you possibly say that something as minuscule as $75 million is a draconian cut that's going to mean, you know, jobs are going to be lost and, you know, children will die and the usual, you know. So that's what people need to understand. When the government says something, it's really important to get them to define their terms so that you understand exactly what it is they're talking about, so that you can make an informed decision about whether you think this is a good idea or whether you think this is a bad idea.
Okay. It's interesting because, yeah, I don't know how to put this. It seems like the impression is, yeah, there's this big cut, and look, we're really tightening our belt, and we're really going to do this, and doggone it, we're going to make sure we're fiscally conservative, just like you're saying, and we're really going to dig in here, and obviously the opposite turns out. But wanting to be clear, are you saying that the budget, this supplemental budget that's coming on, it's most likely not only going to not decrease, it's going to actually increase?
It will be
correct?
higher, yes.
Okay.
In federal budget parlance, what they do is pretty much what you've described here. They take their expenses for year X, they add a chunk to that, let's say 10%, and that's the new budget for the new year, X plus 1. Then when they start talking about budget cuts, it's cuts to the new year.
Plus 1, yeah.
So let's say your budget is $100. We're going to do a 10% increase request the next year. Now your budget's $110. Somebody comes along and says, no, we have to cut 5%. So you still end up with a $105 increase, or $105.
$5 increase.
Is that what's going on here, or is there something else?
Yeah, it's something like that. I mean, because it's so convoluted, the whole thing, if you really wanted to, it would be difficult for me to say, yes, that is the case with every single agency. But because some of them in fact are having a decrease, others are not having a decrease, others the decrease is really small. And then if you start looking at what their budget was in if you're going to compare what their biennial budget was in 2011-12 to what it's going to be in 13-14, then what you need to do is start extracting what they call one-time funding, because that's not part of this cut. And a lot of times, I think I was looking at what I really started to clue into how complicated this was when I started focusing in on the retirement system, because if you look at, I think it was their 09-10 budget, it looked like they had this massive budget cut in 11-12. And I said, well, I mean, you guys have already cut your budget by some massive amount. Oh, no. That was just our new computer system that we had that year. That's why that amount, that one-time funding, is not there anymore. So to say blanket, yes, that's the way it is. You can't really say it because it really depends on the agency. But that definitely is true. This is why, we're going to have a 10% the budget is going to increase from $100 to $110, and this is the default. And this is why, with a straight face, when they have to cut $5, they can actually say, we're cutting our budget. Well, wait a second, you're still spending more.
Is the 8% decrease, limited though it may be to the general fund, is that going to stick, or is it going to get nibbled away with exceptions?
These standard budget cuts, well, in fact, were dribbled away a little bit when the governor went back in. So we had the 8% budget cut. That got cut down to 6.5% of a cut by the governor. So in some of those agencies, their 8% cut got cut down to only a 6.5% cut, or even a less than that of a cut. But again, it's something that it's difficult to say blanket-wise, because each one is a little bit different. So, and that's part of the thing. That's part of what makes this so complicated. Oops.
Is this on?
Yes.
Maureen, with the retirement funding crisis, the employees are putting in their part as they go along. Is the crisis because government has not funded those accounts?
Right now, here in Wyoming, the pension fund is funded at about, I think it's about 82%. So what that means is that if that fund were to close out today, the government would have 82 cents for every dollar it is promised to pay. So, I mean, it's not that we haven't been putting in enough, it's just that they depend on investment returns, and those investment returns are way down. So there's a bill that I haven't been following, I'm not totally sure what's happened with it, that was going forward, where the employee was going to have to contribute more, starting, I'm not sure exactly when. Except my big concern with that is that, I think this thing happened with their health insurance. We needed to increase contributions. The employee was going to have to increase the contribution, but guess who pays for the employee's increase in contribution? I'm looking at this. I think this is what I'm going to start looking at next. So the same with the pension fund. It needs to have more contributions, or the benefits need to drop. And unless that happens, we're sort of heading in the same direction as most of these other places that have a crisis.
Two things. One, if I understand it correctly, this is an 8% or 6.5% per biennium cut. So to annualize it, you cut that in half.
More or less, yes.
Okay. The other thing is again, I'm not sure about this, but I understand that the people who figure pension benefits and what they can pay therefore how they have to fund it, they are required by law to assume at least 8% return. We'll pause now while everybody laughs.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's by law, but certainly that is what they're assuming. Is it by law? Because that is what they do assume. They do assume here, and that's part of the reason why a lot of people on the Appropriations Committee are saying, look, this is just not going to work out. We're not going. It's very unlikely we're going to get an 8% return.
Now, these shadow budgets, or the budgets that the Game and Fish had that were hidden, can we go over these a little bit? I mean, how do they exist? Also, is there a way to bring like legislation forward to make it so that everyone could see them more readily?
Yeah.
Okay.
That HB 78 will bring what they call the commission budget under the scope of the legislature for WYDOT and for the Game and Fish Department. There is no legislation going forward so far anyway. In fact, that HB 78 originally included both the University of Wyoming and the community colleges, but given the amount of pushback legislators were expecting from those two organizations, they decided, look, let's at least just try to get this going with the Game and Fish and WYDOT, and then we'll work on these other guys later. Sometimes that's what happens. You know, it's the art of the doable, right? Yeah. So we have, and so the reason that exists, and actually Amy knows a little bit more about this than me, is that supposedly to depoliticize the decisions made by these agencies, they take part of the responsibility or the accountability of these agencies away from the legislature, and they give it to a commission. The commission people are, at least for the Game and Fish Department anyway, are appointed by the governor. So that was sort of the idea, but it's just not working out. So,
how did you find out about these? I mean, how far? Obviously, these weren't, in the open for. Are they? Can I go online and find these hidden budgets?
Yeah, you can.
Okay.
Yeah. I was looking. I was trying to figure out this Game and Fish thing, and they were talking about this $10 million budget, and then in their budget narrative, if you go to this Administration and Information Department, all the budgets, the budget requests, everything is there. And so in their budget narrative, in the Game and Fish budget narrative, I was reading, oh yeah, we got to cut this. Our general fund budget is 9.8 million, and then they started talking about this other 77 million that they had hanging around, and I thought, wait a minute. And so then I went to their website and I started looking at their annual reports, and that's when I realized, oh, okay, there's a whole other thing happening here. And then I realized that the same thing is going on with WYDOT. So it's just a matter of really being curious and taking a look, because there's like way more stuff going on here, I think, than people realize.
Thank you. Well, how many pages? I mean, you say you looked, and then you see there's a whole other, $77,000 or $1 million dollars. How many pages did you sort through before you finally said, oh, this is completely different from what I think it is?
Oh, well, I just needed to go with the Game and Fish Department. All I needed to do was go to their website and find their commission page, and then go to their annual reports, and I could find everything I wanted. But with WYDOT, you can't do that. And in fact, you ask them, and they just go. And so now we're at the point of doing a Freedom of Information request to get that budget. So they really, really don't want to show that budget. So, I think
both of those agencies, both WYDOT and Game and Fish, get a lot of federal money. How much of their budget and that shadow budget includes that federal money?
Well, that's where a lot of the you have to break it out, but a lot of that with WYDOT, a lot of the federal funds are in the. So for WYDOT, for instance, only about 85 million of their. Every year, WYDOT spends about $500 million. 85 million of that comes from general funds, because both WYDOT and Game and Fish originally were never supposed to have general fund money. They were supposed to be self-funding. And in fact, you look at the Game and Fish website, and right on I think it's the front page, or maybe it's the budget page, where they say, we take no general fund money. We're completely self-sustaining. And that's what I worry about when we're starting to talk now about this lottery corporation, because I don't think people really realize what that lottery bill is about. That lottery bill is about making another bureaucracy that's going to be self-funding, just like Game and Fish and just like YDOT, you know. And so you know how long that's going to last. That's the problem here. Is government is like a fungus. It just grows and grows and grows. So,
going back to the pensions, wouldn't it be more feasible to have an individual account that the employee puts money into, the state would put a defined amount into, but it's in his name, and his name only?
Yeah, in fact, Amy was on a bill the last couple of years, I think, where the idea was to shift the pension fund from what we call a defined benefit, which means that at the end of your retirement, at the end of your working time, when you go into retirement, you get X amount, to something called a defined contribution, where, okay, I'm working for the government now, I'm putting in this much, they're putting in that much. Depending on how well the fund does, that's what I'm going to get at the end. So the liability for the taxpayer is much, and actually for the retiree as well, is much less, because you hear about these little towns that their pension fund runs out of money. I mean, imagine you're 80 years old, you're sitting there, you're waiting for your check to come, and it doesn't come. So there's a problem for the retirees as well, and that's, I think, what people need to really understand about a little bit more, that the system that we have now was built at a time when we had a lot of young people coming into the workforce that could pay for that. But that whole demographic has turned around. And so, yes, things have to change, and we need to either push again for the state to move to a defined contribution plan, or some other option.
Well, they define Social Security as a Ponzi scheme.
It is a Ponzi scheme.
These state retirement programs look the same thing.
Yeah, no, you're right.
There are towns in California with less than 10% funding for their pension liabilities.
Yeah. Those will go for pretty soon.
What makes you think just because you put this under the governor or under the legislature, they still won't have their secret little funds?
Well, they potentially could still have secret funds, but at least now we'll know where all that money is coming. The people who we've elected will be able to have, or the Appropriations Committee will have a full view of their entire budget. Because, I mean, the thing with having hidden budgets and saying, look, our budget is only 10 million, and you're wanting to cut us 350,000, is what that does is create really sympathetic ears to people who have this idea that, well, you know, we could solve this just by taking more money from taxpayers, by increasing the gas tax or by increasing fees. But if people realize, no, hold on a second, their budget is actually 7, 10, or 20 times bigger than what they're actually talking about, then you can start to work against that. But I mean, the malfeasance, if that's what you're sort of implying, I mean, malfeasance is something that, you know, potentially could happen anywhere. So.
Oh, I was just going to comment on you mentioned, well, why don't they set up a plan where employees can contribute and have their own money? They have that as well. Employees have a 457B. I used to be a state employee, oddly enough, for the Game and Fish.
Oh, no.
Well, I left.
I'm sure you're still a nice guy.
I quickly went to the private sector, so, and I'm really glad to be there. But the 457B works like this. The state will contribute up to $20 a month. They'll match you every $20 a month. So most employees are courted and said, you know, are told, well, at least do your $20 because that's free money the state's going to give you, right? So everybody sets it up, $20 a month, and it's a recurring $20 a month that the state employees put in. On top of that, they have their pension plan, okay? Now that used to be, when I was a state employee, 11.5% of your salary was put into a pension plan for you. 6.5% of that was the agency's responsibility. 6.5% of that was your responsibility, but you never paid your responsibility. The agency actually kicked that in for you. So the entire 11.5% was actually plowed into a fund for you in retirement. And I like what this gentleman said about the 90%, because that is the figure that we always hear from the governor now. Well, state employees are only at 90% of their salary. They're only at 90%. But consider that pension fund that I just talked about. If you take that 90% and another 11% of their salary, where are they at? They're making a little bit of cash there, and that's really wrong. And the other thing that's wrong about the system is, that's happening, that I don't like, that really needs to be looked at possibly, is that it becomes a little game when you get to retirement age. They call it the rule of 85. So your age plus the number of years you've worked for the state have to add up to 85 to retire with full benefits there. But what they do is they base your retirement pay or your pension plan pay on the last 3 years of your highest salary, your last 3 highest salaries. So what employees do is they take a promotion and they'll stick on for 3 years and then retire. And that is a game that really needs to stop. They need to make it, in my opinion, based on your contribution to the system. And now, I'll have to admit now, I don't know the exact amount that employees put in. It has changed. It's not, you know, employees actually do get an amount taken out of their salary now. 1.43%. Thank you, Representative Halverson. So they have contributed, but like this gentleman said, the sad part of it is one day we will fall off a fiscal cliff. We're actually hurting the state employees because they think they're cushy and they have payments and they have responsibilities and they're good people living their lives. But they need to know that that gravy train can stop. And when it does, it's going to be extremely painful. And so that's why I am part of this conversation. That's just what I wanted to say. Thank you for all the talks.
Amy, did you want to, didn't you and the Appropriations Committee last time put in something to stop that salary spiking, they call it?
Yes, I think we did that. No, the 3-year thing was a change. It used to be 1 year. They changed it to 3 years for exactly that reason.
We wanted to go to 5.
And they're going to 5, yeah.
Yeah, we wanted to go to 5.
Yeah.
Just a minute here. When this gentleman mentioned the 85, I furnished some food for a retirement party last week for a guy that retired from the state at age 52. Go figure that.
That's a good deal.
Another reason to bring Game and Fish and WyoDOT under the legislature's oversight is, well, at one time the largest airline holding company in the world was the Central Intelligence Agency, and it was all off budget. Now, I don't think WyoDOT is smuggling cocaine across the Andes, but I want to know.
The one thing that I'd say about the WYDOT budget, the commission side of the WYDOT budget, and Maureen touched on it, is that originally when the commission system was set up, it was the general thought in many states was it was a way to try to depoliticize road building. In other words, here in Laramie County, we would have, if we uncoupled the commission from those dollars and we did road project decision making on the floor of the House and the floor of the Senate, Laramie County would be gravy, because we have we elect a lot of people to the House. Small communities in Wyoming would probably be in trouble because they would basically be outvoted every single time and would not get the road projects done that they wanted to do. So that was the original intent. But I think what has happened is the budget has just grown so large. Most of the policymakers, legislators, I mean, when I first came there, I honestly thought that the DOT had 500 employees, because that's all you see in their budget. They have 2,000 employees. 1,500 of them are under the commission budget. So you only see 500. So just for transparency, this bill does not decouple the commission. It only allows lawmakers to see it. And still, I mean, the Appropriations Committee will not be making decisions on road projects, but they will get to at least review the commission side budget for the DOT.
Okay. The WYDOT getting money from the feds is a can of worms. How much do they get? How much of that has strings attached, and what do those strings cost?
All of it has strings. I used to work for the feds.
Yeah, I know. I know that. It's a rhetorical question.
Yeah.
I mean, and some of those strings, they're ridiculous. They cost more than what they get from the feds.
No, you're right.
In terms of also regulations, what they have to do. If we take money from the feds, it won't be long before we have high occupancy vehicle lanes. They had them on the East Coast, and that's a monster.
Amy, The 500 that you knew about that are in the open, who signs their paycheck? That is a state check, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Those 500, even in those 500, some of them are going to be a mix of state and federal funds.
Okay. The bottom line to me is whose signature and whose check is that they received?
It's the state's.
Okay. Now the other 1,500 you mentioned?
A mix as well. Some of them are also mixed.
There may be mixed funding, but who writes the check?
The state.
One more
Everybody's
question.
going crazy.
What of all of these organizations can be replaced by the private sector? Seriously. I mean, I know my dad's Paul Cripps in China. I don't know a lot of you guys know him. And I know my father and Keith Tremels, like 3 or 4 years ago when I was in the Middle East in the military, they tried to start a charter school here in town, and I didn't really do my homework before coming here. I know a lot of that was met with fierce resistance, but I mean, a lot of education could be cut out for private sector jobs. A lot of, imagine YDOT could be private sector jobs where it's efficient. A lot of, Forest Service or not Forest Service, Game and Fish could be cut out for private sector jobs. How can we start going forward to that? Because obviously the government's inefficient and private sector has to be efficient. I have to be efficient with my business or I don't eat, So how can we go about those steps?
There's something called behavioral finance. Has anybody here heard of behavioral finance? Investors study it because if you want to make money and you're playing the stock market, the normal person would, most anybody, some stocks are going up and some stocks are going down, they hate to sell the one that goes down because they hate to lose.
It's all based off of fear and greed.
Yes, that's right. And there have been experiments. This Nobel Prize winner named Kahneman did an experiment with mugs. He said, okay, here's some mugs. How much would you pay for this mug or that mug? Choose your favorite. And they said, I pay $1.50. Okay, they said, okay, here it is. You can have it. Now, how much would you sell it for? They'd say $400. No, $450, I should have said. But basically, when people lose, they scream. They just absolutely scream. And so they're screaming louder because it's more immediate than us screaming. So one of the, besides transparency and parity and all of that kind of thing, it will never happen unless citizenry screams. Mm-hmm. That's absolutely. So we've used our time. Do you have anything to wind up?
No, I'm good.
Keith Fukas, I forgot to mention him. Keith is our reporter, an in-depth reporter. He's been with us almost a year now. And I think we got everybody that's on our staff. We have the legislators have taken some time to come here, and I'm still afraid to say your name. Peeperinen. New, and
I'm on his aide.
And you're an aide, and you're a friend, right? Okay, and thank you very much for coming.
I have no staff.
And please enjoy some cookies and some conversation. Hang out as long as you like. Thank you for coming.